A widow gave shelter to a stranger. It was Jesus Christ in human form. The wind swept through Street Isidore Court with a cold, restless insistence, the kind that made the thin aluminum walls of the small houses tremble. Streetlights flickered over cracked sidewalks and rusted mailboxes, casting long shadows across a neighborhood that had learned to survive more winters than it cared to remember. Most doors were already locked for the night. Most hearts, too. But something was about to break the silence. What if the man lying outside your home wasn't just a homeless stranger, but Jesus Christ himself in human form? That unthinkable question hovered over the edge of a quiet December evening, waiting to reveal itself. Inside a modest, aging house sat Mary Ellen Carter, a widow who had grown used to talking only to her old TV and the hum of her space heater. Her children had moved across the country, New York, Phoenix, Seattle, calling occasionally, sending money during the holidays, but taking with them a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She wrapped her cardigan tight around her shoulders as she prepared her simple dinner: canned soup, day-old bread, and chamomile tea. Then came the sound. A faint scrape. Almost nothing, yet enough to pull her away from the routine that had protected her from loneliness. Mary Ellen stepped toward the window. Beyond the chain-link fence, under the dim street lamp, a man lay slumped against the low wall of her driveway, barefoot, dust-covered, clothes torn, as if he had walked through miles of desert. His long hair and beard framed a face, both exhausted and strangely peaceful, as if he had collapsed not from fear, but from the weight of some ancient journey. She looked down the street, not a soul in sight, only the distant rumble of a passing truck and the flicker of a broken neon sign. Something heavy moved inside her chest, fear wrestling with compassion. "Sir?" she called through the cold air. He didn't answer. His breathing was shallow, almost fading. Her hand trembled on the gate latch. Every warning of modern America flashed through her mind. He could be dangerous, unstable, high, violent, yet something else, something older than fear, pushed her forward. Mary Ellen opened the gate. And at that moment, without knowing it, a lonely American widow welcomed Jesus Christ in human form onto her porch and into a story that would transform an entire community. The next morning, the pale New Mexico sunlight filtered through the blinds of Mary Ellen's small living room. The heater clicked on with a tired groan, filling the quiet space with a faint warmth. On the fold-out cot she had set up hours earlier, the stranger lay still, his breathing steady, peaceful, too peaceful for someone who had collapsed on a sidewalk the night before. Mary Ellen approached cautiously, holding a fresh cup of coffee as if it were an offering. When the man opened his eyes, he didn't flinch or look confused. Instead, he met her with a calm, steady gaze, deep, dark, and unafraid. "You're awake," she whispered, unsure why the words felt sacred. He nodded once. "Can you speak? Do you remember anything?" she asked. The man blinked slowly, as though searching the air for an answer he already knew. "No," he finally said, voice soft but clear. "I don't have a name." The simplicity of that statement made the room fall silent. Mary Ellen dragged a chair closer, studying him the way a mother studies a child she hasn't seen in years. "Well, I can't just call you sir," her voice cracked. "How about David?" "It was my husband's name." The stranger's expression shifted, just a small lift of the corners of his mouth, the faintest smile. Then he nodded again, accepting the name as if it belonged to him long before she offered it. While preparing him a small breakfast, Mary Ellen noticed something strange. David's feet were torn and blistered, wounds deep enough that any doctor would demand stitches. She hurried to find ointment and bandages, apologizing for the sting as she cleaned each cut. David didn't wince. Not once. That evening, as she checked the bandages, her breath caught. The swelling was gone. The broken skin had knitted together, and the deepest wound, one she had been sure would scar, had almost vanished entirely. Mary Ellen stepped back, hand trembling over her mouth. No medication worked this fast. No body healed overnight like that. What are you?" she whispered under her breath. David said nothing, only watched her with eyes that seemed to carry an ancient, quiet certainty. And in that modest American living room, Mary Ellen Carter felt the first undeniable tremor of a truth she wasn't ready to say out loud. This was no ordinary man. In the days that followed, a quiet rhythm settled over Mary Ellen's home, one that felt strangely new, yet comfortingly familiar. David, the stranger she'd pulled in from the cold, moved through the small house with a gentleness that didn't match his rugged appearance. He rose before sunrise, sweeping the porch, tightening loose screws on the fence, and watering the dried-out plants Mary Ellen had long given up on. He never asked what needed to be done. He simply noticed and cared. From the kitchen window, neighbors began to take note. Mrs. Henderson, who walked her terrier every morning, slowed her pace each time she passed. "Who's that man at Mary Ellen's place?" she whispered to a friend. "Another drifter," someone muttered at the gas station. A younger man scoffed. "Watch. He'll rob her blind." Rumors spread faster than the desert wind swirling through Street Isidore Court. In a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, a soft-spoken stranger was enough to feed a week's worth of speculation. Mary Ellen tried to act as if nothing had changed, but something undeniably had. The house felt warmer, brighter. Even the lingering loneliness she had carried for decades seemed to loosen its grip. Yet she couldn't shake the fear that people would misunderstand David, and she wasn't wrong. One chilly afternoon, Father Matthew O'Connor appeared at her door, his black coat dusted with sand from the wind. He had heard whispers from the parish. Mary Ellen took in a homeless man. "Something's off about him. You should go check." She invited him in, nerves fluttering like trapped birds. David was outside, sitting on the porch, carving a small piece of wood with a pocket knife. "Is that him?" Father Matthew asked quietly. Mary Ellen nodded. When the priest stepped outside, David lifted his eyes. The moment their gazes met, something changed in Father Matthew's posture. His shoulders stiffened, breath paused. Not fear, not suspicion, something deeper. As if he were being seen far beyond his clerical collar and practiced sermons. "Good afternoon," the priest said. "Good afternoon," David replied, voice calm as still water. "You're staying with Mary Ellen, I hear, for now." The priest studied him, but words failed. He couldn't explain the sudden tremor in his chest, the sense that this man carried a presence he had only ever felt in prayer. When he finally left, Father Matthew whispered to Mary Ellen, "Be careful, but also, be open." And as he walked away, he couldn't shake the unsettling certainty that he had just encountered someone far more extraordinary than a stranger in need. The following Saturday, the neighborhood buzzed with its usual weekend routine, families heading to the street, Isidore Farmers Market, teenagers lingering outside the dollar store, old men sipping burnt coffee near the gas pumps. Mary Ellen decided to venture out for groceries, and David walked beside her with quiet steps, taking in every detail of the world around him, as if seeing it for the first time, or remembering it. The market was alive with color and sound, vendors shouting prices, children chasing each other between stalls, the scent of roasted corn and fresh tortillas drifting through the air. Mary Ellen paused to chat with Mrs. Ruiz about tomatoes when a sudden burst of movement cut through the noise. A young boy, Tony, known around the neighborhood for the braces strapped to his crooked legs, darted between the crowd, trying to keep pace with his mother. His foot caught on a crate, and he fell hard onto the pavement. People winced, expecting the familiar cry of pain. But Tony didn't cry. He just looked up, stunned, straight into the eyes of David. David approached slowly, kneeling beside the boy. The market seemed to quiet around them, as if someone had lowered the volume on the entire world. "Does it hurt?" David asked gently. "A little," Tony whispered, embarrassed. David placed a hand on the boy's twisted leg, not forcefully, not dramatically, just a simple, human touch. Mary Ellen froze where she stood, her breath caught in her throat. "You've wanted to walk without help for a long time," David said, his voice warm as sunlight. "Stand up, if you want to." Tony shook his head. "I can't. My legs." "Today," David said softly, "you can." The crowd watched, first confused, then captivated. Slowly, Tony pushed himself up. His braces rattled. His knees trembled. His mother ran forward, ready to catch him, but he didn't fall. He took one step, then another, then another. A gasp rippled across the market as Tony began to walk toward his mother, who burst into tears, covering her mouth with both hands. "Mom, look, I'm walking." People surrounded them, some filming, others speechless. A vendor whispered, "That's a miracle." Another crossed himself. David didn't stay to receive praise. He simply picked up Mary Ellen's grocery bag and nodded for her to follow. Back home, Mary Ellen's hands shook. She had seen kindness before, but nothing like this. And deep inside, a seed of certainty began to grow. David wasn't just a stranger. Something holy was walking beside her. The miracle at the market spread through street, Isidore Court like wildfire. But David moved through the following days as quietly as ever, fixing a loose step on the porch, helping Mary Ellen carry groceries, sitting outside at dusk, as if listening to something only he could hear. Yet the next miracle would not come in a crowd. It would come in the fragile silence of a broken heart. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the desert hills, Lucy Ramirez appeared at Mary Ellen's door. She was barely 20, holding her baby boy against her chest, eyes swollen from hours of crying. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her troubles. Abandoned by her boyfriend, cut off by her family, juggling part-time jobs that never paid enough. But no one knew how close she had come to giving up entirely. "Miss Mary Ellen," Lucy whispered. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't keep going." Mary Ellen pulled her inside, but Lucy's legs nearly gave out. Her hands trembled so hard she could barely hold her child. When David stepped into the room, she flinched. Not from fear, but from a strange, overwhelming vulnerability. "This is David," Mary Ellen said softly. David approached with a gentleness that made Lucy's breath hitch. He looked not at her tears, but through them, at the exhaustion and despair behind them. "Your baby is healthy," he said. "And you're not as alone as you think." Lucy broke. Not a small, polite cry, but a collapse of everything she had held in for months. "What's wrong with me?" she sobbed. "I feel empty, worthless. I don't have anyone." David knelt beside her, placing one hand lightly on her shoulder. "You're not empty," he said, voice steady as a heartbeat. "You're afraid. Fear convinces you that you have nothing, when in truth, you already carry everything you need." Something shifted in Lucy's face, a softening, a release. Her breath steadied. The shaking stopped. It wasn't dramatic like Tony's healing. It was quieter, deeper, a miracle of the soul instead of the body. When the tears finally eased, Lucy looked down at her son and whispered, "I want to live. For him." That evening, she stayed for dinner, laughing awkwardly as she washed dishes, offering to help with chores. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a burden. And Mary Ellen, watching the scene unfold, realized that David had just offered Lucy something more powerful than a cure. He had given her hope back. Nights in Street Isidore Court had always been still, but now they carried an unexplainable weight, an expectancy, as if something sacred hovered just beyond sight. Mary Ellen felt it most in her sleep. Ever since David arrived, her dreams had shifted from anxious fragments to vivid scenes that felt older than memory itself. One night, she found herself seated at a long wooden table, lanterns flickering above it. Around her sat workers, mothers, men with weary hands, ordinary Americans with extraordinary hunger in their eyes. At the head of the table stood David, breaking bread, passing it gently to each person. When he reached her, his eyes seemed to whisper a truth she had forgotten long ago. She woke with tears on her pillow. Another dream followed days later. A field of golden wheat, stretching endlessly beneath a warm sky. A voice not loud but unmistakably near said, "Don't be afraid. I am with you." Mary Ellen jolted awake, heart racing. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a memory borrowed from heaven. The next morning she shuffled into the kitchen, still shaken. David sat on the porch, gazing toward the horizon, as if expecting someone. Without turning, he spoke softly. "I saw the same table you did." The coffee mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. She stared at him, breath caught. How could he know? How could he see what she had seen in the privacy of her own mind? Her fear pushed her toward the familiar, the logical, and she grabbed her phone, dialing her daughter Gloria in New York. "Mama? You never call this early," Gloria said, voice brisk with city energy. "Gloria, something strange is happening here." Mary Ellen explained the stranger. The healing at the market, the dreams that felt too real. She expected comfort. Instead, she heard worry sharpen into suspicion. "Mama, please. This sounds like a cult thing. You're vulnerable. He could be manipulating you." "No, Gloria," she whispered. "He asked for nothing." "That's exactly what makes it dangerous," her daughter insisted. "Take him to a doctor, or call the police if you have to." Mary Ellen hung up with her heart torn in two, caught, between her daughter's fear and the unshakable peace she felt in David's presence. That night, she sat alone on her bed, wrestling with doubt. Was she being fooled? Or, for the first time in decades, was she finally learning to believe again? The silence offered no answers, only the lingering echo of that dream. I am with you. In the quiet hours before dawn, Father Matthew O'Connor sat alone in the rectory office, a single lamp illuminating his well-worn Bible. He had read the Gospels thousands of times over the course of his priesthood, yet lately every page felt heavier, as if the words had awakened from sleep and were now looking back at him. Ever since meeting David, something inside him refused to settle. The memory of that first encounter haunted him. Those eyes, not intense, not demanding, but knowing. As if the stranger on Mary Ellen's porch had seen every one of Father Matthew's silent doubts, doubts he had never confessed aloud, not even to God. Unable to ignore this stirring any longer, the priest drove to Mary Ellen's house the next afternoon. She welcomed him with a mixture of relief and unease, sensing the weight he carried. David sat on the porch again, carving a small cross-shaped ornament from a block of wood. He looked up when the priest approached, not with surprise, but with a calm that made Matthew's breath tighten. I'd like to speak with you, the priest said, voice cracking slightly. David nodded. Sit. They settled across from each other, silence stretching between them like a veil waiting to be lifted. Who are you? Really? Father Matthew finally asked, his voice steadier than he felt. You speak as though you know God, not just believe in Him. David didn't hesitate. I know the Father. The priest's pulse hammered. He forced a skeptical tone. People say many things. Truth doesn't need many words, David replied. Only recognition. Father Matthew pulled a small crucifix from his coat, holding it between them like a test. Tell me what you see. David studied it for a long moment. I see pain, he said softly. I see betrayal. I see sacrifice freely given. But I also see hope and life that never ends. The crucifix trembled in Matthew's hand. No theology book had ever spoken like that. No sermon he'd heard or preached carried that kind of authority, quiet, humble, and profoundly real. You speak as if you lived it, he whispered. David's eyes lifted to meet his, and in them Matthew saw something ancient, sorrowful, radiant, something he had only ever imagined when reading Scripture. The priest felt his defenses crumble. The rational mind battled the trembling faith inside him. So, what am I supposed to do? He asked. David's answer was, simple. Believe what your soul already knows. And in that moment, Father Matthew realized that he was not just meeting a man. He was encountering the very heart of the faith he had dedicated his life to. Tension had been building in Street Isidore Court ever since rumors of miracles began circling. Some neighbors were hopeful, others suspicious, but the ones most threatened were the restless teenagers who drifted through the neighborhood at night, fueled by boredom, anger, and the belief that nothing good ever came to places like theirs. One cold evening, just past 10 p.m., their frustration boiled over. 3 young men, hoodies up, voices slurred with cheap liquor, stumbled toward Mary Ellen's house. They had heard whispers of a healer, a prophet, a crazy drifter pretending to be holy. To them it sounded like a joke begging to be confronted. The clang of metal rattled the quiet street as one of them kicked the gate. "Hey, old lady!" another shouted. "Bring out your miracle man." From inside, Mary Ellen froze, heart pounding. She rushed to the window, terrified to see the trio pounding on her fence. "Please don't go out there," she begged as David rose calmly from the couch. But he was already moving. When David stepped onto the porch light flickered as if the air itself shifted. The teenagers fell quiet, not because of fear, but because his presence demanded it without a word. "What do you want?" Mary Ellen called shakily from behind him. One boy, barely 18, trembling with anger he didn't understand, lifted a brick. "Back off," he spat. "People like you mess with our heads." David didn't flinch. He didn't plead. He simply stepped closer, eyes filled not with judgment, but with an unsettling, unshakable compassion. "You're hurting," David said. "Shut up!" the boy snapped, though his voice cracked. David's tone softened even further. "I know the pain you carry. The father who struck you, the mother who walked away, the nights you wished you didn't wake up." The brick slipped from the boy's hand, hitting the pavement with a dull thud. His friends stared. stunned. How do you know that? The boy whispered, voice breaking. You're not angry, David said. You're broken, and brokenness can be healed. The young man dropped to his knees right there on the cold concrete. The sobs came hard and fast, raw, childlike, unstoppable. His friends tried to lift him, but he wouldn't move. He was unraveling in the only place he'd ever felt truly seen. David knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. You're not alone anymore. Mary Ellen watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. She had witnessed healings of the body, but this mending of a shattered soul felt like something only God himself could do. And in that moment, every doubt she carried cracked open. Compassion, not power, had brought a violent heart to its knees, and the street knew it. Something holy was living among them. By the following week, Street Isidore Court had become a magnet for whispers. People spoke of a stranger who healed with a touch, who calmed violence without raising a hand, who looked into hearts as if they were open books. Stories changed with every retelling, but one thing remained: constant curiosity. It didn't take long for the media to catch the scent. On a bright, chilly morning, a local news van rolled to a stop outside Mary Ellen's house. A young reporter named Hannah Lee, microphone in hand, stepped out with the confidence of someone used to chasing stories that rarely paid off. Her cameraman followed, adjusting his equipment as they approached the front gate. "Ma'am?" Hannah called out when Mary Ellen opened the door. "We're here about the man staying with you, the one people say performed a miracle at the farmer's market. Could we ask him a few questions?" Mary Ellen's pulse quickened. She hated the idea of cameras turning her quiet home into a spectacle. But before she could refuse, David appeared behind her, calm as ever. "It's all right," he said gently. "Let them in." They set up in the small front yard. No fancy lighting, no stage backdrop, just the fading paint of the house and the desert breeze. Hannah lifted her mic. "Sir, can you state your name for the record?" "David," he said. "That's the name I was given." "Are the rumors true?" she pressed. "Did you heal a little boy who couldn't walk?" David didn't hesitate. "I didn't heal him. I reminded him of what was already possible." The answer disarmed her. It wasn't evasive or boastful, just honest, spoken with a peace that unsettled her professionalism. "So, what are you?" Hannah asked softly. "A healer? A prophet?" "I'm not important," David replied. "What matters is the pain people carry and how unseen they feel." The camera slowly drifted downward as the cameraman, without realizing it, lowered his arms. David's words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded lived. "This country isn't suffering because of what it lacks," David continued. "It's suffering because people stopped seeing each other, stopped listening, stopped forgiving." A silence settled over the yard, heavy but comforting. "Do you have a message?" Hannah whispered. "For those watching?" David looked directly into the lens, and for a moment the air around them felt charged. "Yes," he said. "Look into someone's eyes today and really see them. Ask how they are, and mean it. Forgive even when it's hard. Love even when it isn't returned. That is where healing begins." When the interview ended, no one moved. Hannah wiped her eyes discreetly. The cameraman wasn't even recording anymore. He couldn't. His hands were shaking. Within hours, the raw footage hit social media. No dramatic music, no sensational editing. Just a man speaking with a quiet authority that made the whole nation pause. And by nightfall, millions had watched it, many whispering the same chilling question: who is this man? In the days after the interview went viral, Street Isidore Court no longer felt like the forgotten corner of Albuquerque. Strangers drove by slowly, hoping for a glimpse of the man from the video. Neighbors lingered near their porches, speaking in hushed tones. Some were fearful, others expectant. But in the midst of this growing attention, something far more personal unfolded inside Mary Ellen's small home. One morning while pouring coffee, Mary Ellen felt a strange tightening in her chest. It wasn't sharp, just a heavy, sinking pressure that made her lean against the counter. Her breath shortened. Her hands trembled. David appeared beside her, as if he had been waiting. "You're not well," he said gently. "It's just age catching up to me," she insisted, but her voice wavered. David placed 2 fingers on her wrist, not checking her pulse, but listening in a way that bypassed the body entirely. His eyes softened. "Rest today," he whispered. "Let the world be still for you." She obeyed reluctantly, lying on the couch while Lucy played with the baby in the next room. Father Matthew arrived later, checking on her with pastoral concern. But even he sensed something deeper than a physical ailment, a spiritual unraveling, a soul preparing for something sacred. Days passed, and despite her weakness, Mary Ellen found herself strangely at peace. The fear of dying had quieted, replaced by the warmth of dreams too vivid to dismiss. Fields of wheat, voices of comfort, a gentle light calling her by name. Word of her illness reached the clergy who had watched David's interview with equal parts awe and alarm. Finally, Father Matthew gathered a small group, 2 Catholic priests, a Protestant pastor, and a theology professor from the university. They arrived one afternoon, carrying notebooks, dog-eared scriptures, and questions they weren't sure they were ready to ask. Mary Ellen prepared coffee for them with trembling hands, while David sat in the living room, waiting, not as a defendant, but as someone who had nothing to prove. The conversation began cautiously. "What authority do you speak from?" the professor asked. "Love," David answered, simply. "Are you claiming to be sent by God?" one of the priests pressed. "I didn't come to claim anything," David replied. "Only to remind." The pastor leaned forward. "Remind of what?" "That the center of all things is the same, yesterday, today, and forever." He drew a small circle on a napkin, placing a dot at its heart. "People wander the edges," he said. "Few dare return to the center." Their questions melted into silence. These were men accustomed to debate, but now they found themselves listening with the humility of students. When they left, Father Matthew lingered, his expression soft and shaken. "I don't know who you are," he whispered to David, "but something in me already does." David didn't answer. He only placed a gentle hand on the priest's shoulder. And in that small living room, with Mary Ellen resting nearby, the boundaries of faith began to shift, as if the scripture they had preached for decades had suddenly stepped into the room with them. The peace in Street Isidore Court did not last. As word spread beyond the neighborhood, not everyone came seeking healing or hope. Some arrived with anger sharpened by fear of deception, fear of blasphemy, fear of losing control over what they believed faith should look like. One gray afternoon, a group of religious activists gathered at the end of the street, holding signs painted in red. "False prophet, no more lies. Only Christ saves." Their chants echoed like cracks in the calm desert air. Mary Ellen watched from behind her screen door, heart aching. Lucy held her baby tighter. Even Father Matthew, who had come to check on Mary Ellen, felt the sting of division. Inside, David remained still quiet, steady, unaffected by the rising storm outside. "You don't have to go out there," Mary Ellen whispered. "They don't want to understand." "They're hurting," David said softly, "and hurt often looks like anger." Before she could stop him, he walked into the yard. The shouting intensified. "Who do you think you are? Stop misleading people. Leave this neighborhood." But the moment David reached the fence, the noise faltered. Not because he demanded silence, but because compassion radiated from him so strongly it unsettled even the angriest hearts. "I didn't come to mislead," David said. "I came to love." A man at the front stepped forward, fists clenched. "If you love us, leave. You're tearing people apart." David's eyes gentled. "Then I will go." Mary Ellen gasped. "David, no. This is your home." He turned to her with a softness that held eternity. "Home is anywhere, love is alive, and it is alive here, even if I step away." That night he recorded a message on Mary Ellen's old phone. He didn't ask for lighting or staging. He simply sat in the dim glow of the kitchen lamp, hands folded, eyes filled with a peace too deep to disguise. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means my time here has ended." Mary Ellen covered her mouth, trembling. "You don't need me to perform miracles. The miracle is already inside you. Forgive even when it hurts. Love even when it's not returned. And when doubt feels heavy, remember what you felt when we met. That was not me. That was God moving in you." He paused, as if listening to a voice beyond the room. "I never left you. I never will." The video ended with a final line that Mary Ellen would replay 1,000 times. "I am in every act of love." And by sunrise, David was gone. At sunrise, Mary Ellen stepped into the quiet hallway and immediately felt it, the stillness, the absence, the unmistakable truth. David's cot was neatly made. No shoes, no clothes, no trace of a man. who had slept there night after night. Only a folded blanket and a handwritten note placed gently on top. I was here. Mary Ellen pressed it to her heart. She didn't cry. Not yet. A warmth spread through her chest, the same warmth she had felt the first night. David looked at her with eyes that saw far beyond the broken pieces of her life. Word spread quickly through Street Isidore Court. People came silently, carrying candles, flowers, small offerings of gratitude. Tony, the little boy who once couldn't walk, left a drawing of a man walking into the light. Lucy stood on the porch with her baby, whispering, "He saved me before I even knew I needed saving." Even the young man from the gang, the one who had collapsed in tears, arrived and placed a single white stone by the fence, a symbol of forgiveness and a life-changing course. And through all of it, Mary Ellen felt a quiet truth settle over the neighborhood. He had not disappeared. He had simply returned to where he always was. Weeks passed, then months. The viral video continued to circulate, touching hearts far beyond New Mexico. Strangers visited the block not to seek a spectacle, but to sit in silence, hoping to feel even a fraction of the presence that had once walked those streets. And then, one gentle October morning, a year to the day after David vanished, Mary Ellen did not wake. She was found in her favorite armchair, hands folded over her chest, a peaceful smile softening her features. On her lap lay her mother's old recipe book, open to a page where she had once written, "What matters is not how long you live, but how deeply you love while you're here." Her funeral was not a mourning but a gathering of gratitude. Father Matthew spoke with a trembling voice. Through Mary Ellen we learn that Christ does not just visit the world. He dwells in those who dare to welcome him. As dusk settled over Street Isidore Court, neighbors lit candles along the sidewalks. The block glowed with a soft golden light, as if echoing the same warmth David had left behind. And though Mary Ellen was gone, her legacy lived on, in reconciled families, in healed hearts, in acts of forgiveness that rippled outward like quiet miracles. Because once Jesus walks into a neighborhood, he never truly leaves. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Jesus Christ Encounters for more true, faith-filled stories of hope, miracles, and transformation. You are not alone. Miracles still walk among us.